Well, I'd love to start with the calling. I know your work really well. I've listened to you over the years. I love your writing. So I know that this was a calling to be a rabbi. I think that many of my listeners will want to hear that. And just personally, Steve, you should know that I love hearing about people's childhoods. I know your father played a big role. So take us back to the early days, the synagogue. Where was it planted?
Yeah.
How did you know that this was such a calling in such a major way?
So let's go back. Ready? All right. So I grew up in this house, and because my parents were overwhelmed and I was pretty really on my own. So all five of us, like if we wanted to do something, you want to play hockey? Fine, walk to the rink.
Yeah.
You want to play baseball? Ride your bike to the practice. Okay. My mom never drove us to school or whatever. Like she
Yeah.
was just overwhelmed. And my dad was at work all the time. For I saw my dad, most of my childhood time spent with my dad was if I went to work with him.
Yeah.
I went every Saturday. From the time I was 6 or 7, I worked at the junkyard, and we all did. So, there wasn't a lot of encouragement to engage in anything, but there wasn't any resistance either as long as we could handle it ourselves. Take the bus.
Yeah.
Now, on top of that was a very blue collar perspective on work. And I don't mean work ethic. I have a very, very robust work ethic.
Yeah.
But you want to be an actor? Forget it. You want to be a musician? You're out of your mind. You want to be a
Yeah.
writer? You want to what? You want to be a
Yeah.
writer? Absolutely not. My father's talk with me my junior year of college went like this. Steve, you're going to graduate next year, and I think there are a couple of things you should consider. I said, wow, Dad's talking to me about school now. I saw my parents twice at my university, once when they dropped me off and at graduation. That
Yeah.
was He said, I think you should go to law school and take over Leder Brothers, or you should not go to law school and take over Leder Brothers. Those were my choices. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there was one, for whatever reason, notable exception: the synagogue.
Mm.
They were proud of my involvement. They would drive us there,
Yeah.
and I had some parental support for that, and it was valued in our home.
Mhm.
Books and synagogue were valuable in
Yes.
in the Leder cosmos. Okay. And that therefore was the place where I was able to be around. I mean, the rabbis seemed so learned to me, and they wore suits and ties. And I thought
Yeah.
to myself, there wasn't a dad on our block who wore a suit and tie to work. And I thought
Yeah.
to myself, if I could ever have a job where I wore a suit and tie, I would be the luckiest person in the world.
Yeah.
Now, I hate it, of course, but it was aspirational. And I grew up in a suburb without a lot of that. Most kids I grew up with are still there. They're not aspirational. In
Yeah.
fact, there's this kind of Lutheran, Norwegian, or Scandinavian Lutheran ethos there of mediocrity is the goal
Yes.
because the tall flower is going to get clipped.
Yeah.
You better not get too big for your britches. You
Yeah.
know, keep your head down and work at the junkyard. And I always, for whatever reason, was ambitious. And I always ran toward people in trouble, which we can talk about later. But
Yeah.
so the synagogue was also like the most beautiful room I
Yes.
was ever in as a kid. They didn't take us to the museum, we didn't go to
Yeah.
the theater, we didn't go to the symphony. So it was elevated,
Yeah.
and the girls were there, right? Seriously, I mean, that's I met,
Yeah.
it was high school. I was like involved in my high school pretty heavily, but it was like that's where the girls were. And I went to summer camp, and summer camp was all about the girls,
Yeah.
and the rabbis who I so admired because I didn't have that in my life.
Yeah. Did you like to read?
I'm not a huge reader because I write. And
Yeah.
my wife's all over me about this. I do read, but only things directly related to my world of being a rabbi and all of that. And
Yeah, because I just think of you as scholarly. Like, I think of you often when I talk to you, you're quoting or you're referencing,
well,
you have a
I've
yeah.
studied a lot, but to sit
Yeah.
down and read a novel, that's like I
So
can only
studying appealed to you from that young age and the
yeah,
joy.
And it's so interesting. Yes, my ninth grade drama and speech teacher changed my life.
How
She,
so?
she was the one.
Yeah.
Her name is Sandy Marinson. I was 14. I thought she was quite old. Turns out she was 24.
Oh
She,
my goodness. That's funny.
and by the way, I just saw her 2 days ago.
Oh,
She was in
cool.
California.
Yeah.
I've known her 50 years, but she was the one who saw something in me. She would take me to the University of Minnesota library and check out plays and have me read them and then talk with
Oh,
me about.
I love that.
When my parents left us alone, my three sisters went off to college. My brother and I, my dad was semi-retired. He worked every other month because he hated his brother. So
Yeah.
they traded off.
Yeah.
And my parents would leave me and my little brother Greg for a month at a time
Wow.
on our own. Like
Yeah.
insane. Sandy would have us over to dinner. She
Yeah.
would keep an eye on us, things like that. So she changed my life and encouraged my aspirations.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I loved being on the pulpit at my bar mitzvah. I
Yes.
freaking held court. I loved it. My what we call Devar Torah, like my little sermon on the part of the Torah Bible,
Yeah.
the Hebrew Bible I was reading. I kid you not. It was an anthology. I read everyone an anthology of my own poetry.
That is amazing. I've never heard of that one.
I,
That's
and
so
and
good.
I freaking loved it.
Yeah, destiny was calling.
And and there was another moment too, which I have only lately. I'm in psychotherapy. I'm a big mental health
Yeah.
advocate. I've had mental health struggles.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about. I recently told him about when I was 12 years old. I had to go to synagogue 2 times a week to prepare for my bar mitzvah. And my father, his mother hadn't died right around then, but not long before. And he was going to say the mourner's prayer a few times a week. He also had to pick me up and drive me home because it was closer to the scrapyard than home. And on his way home, he would stop, and there was always a service at 6 o'clock for people who needed to say the mourner's prayer for a loved one who had died within the past 11 months. That's the Jewish law.
Yeah.
And they took turns leading this little service, mostly in English. There were maybe 8, 9, 10 people there. And one day, it was my dad's turn to lead. I was 12 years old. And he took this little prayer book and he handed it to me and he said, "You lead. You lead."
Yeah.
I think that was a big part of what launched me in this direction.
Yeah.
Also, I went to a Jewish summer. I got arrested when I was 14 for shoplifting Bob Dylan albums from Target with my band.
Oh, good. I love that it was Bob
I
Dylan.
was classy, yeah.
Yeah.
I was playing drums in a rock and roll band and,
You
smoke.
needed an outlet. Yeah, I love that you were on the
Yeah,
drums. That's probably
yeah.
like your
It was
self-preservation.
it was great. And I was smoking weed every day in junior high school. I was just
One bathroom, 7
yeah,
people. Yes, you
I was
need a
I
little
was in a bad
take the edge off.
I was on the wrong path. And so I get arrested. My parents are
Yeah.
on vacation in Florida when that happens. My sister Marilyn has to get me out of the Who Scout. And then I have to call my parents who are on
Oh,
vacation and
jeez.
tell them I just got arrested. And you have to come home because we have to meet with a detective. I was so freaked out. And another sort of minor point that becomes major is I remember when they drove us down to the police station in a police car, which was sobering for a 12-year.
Yes. Yes.
And the guy, the cops taking the information, he says, "You have any scars?" I said, "No." And he said, "Like from a hockey puck or a knife fight." I thought, knife fight? This guy thinks like
Yeah.
I'm a punk. I'm not a punk. But I realized in that moment, if you act like a punk, you're
Yeah.
you're a punk.
Yeah. That's your life.
So my parents wake up and realize they need to be parents.
Yeah.
And they decide I need a change in my peer group. And they sent me to this Jewish summer camp in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. Paige, from the moment I stepped off the bus, I was in love with all of it. All of it.
Yes.
All of it. There were all these kids there from Chicago. And when you grew up where I grew up, going to Chicago was like going to Paris. Okay.
Yes.
So they were sophisticated and the girls were so pretty. And, it was the 70s. So they had flowers in their hairs and flowing
Yeah.
dresses on the Sabbath. And, there was
So
music.
good.
And the rabbis, there were these young rabbis who, many of whom became rabbis to avoid Vietnam.
Mhm.
So they were cool.
Yeah.
And they liked the music I liked. And they played guitar and they wore earth shoes and they were hippies. And I thought, this place, we slept in big army tents, like 12 kids in a tent, and we grew our own food in the garden. And it was all kibbutz kind of thing. And I was like,
Oh,
this is fucking great.
yeah.
That was a big part of it. Then I went to Israel at 16. And by the way, it's one of only two times I ever saw my father cry. Was
Why that time? Yeah, tell us about that time.
Well, the first time was when I was 14, and they told the five of us, they sat us down and told us they were getting divorced,
Yeah.
which they ended up not doing because my sister Marilyn raised holy hell.
Yeah.
And, my mother said, well,
Yeah.
dad will get an apartment and I'll make a soup and you kids will take it over there. And Marilyn
Yeah.
said, how about you get an apartment and we bring you a soup? Like she just unloaded on my mother.
Yeah.
So they stayed together. They probably shouldn't have, but who knows? Anyway,
Right?
that was the first time. The second time and last time I ever saw my father cry was when he put me on the plane to Israel. And I think it's because I was living his dream. My father was
Yes.
born before the state of Israel.
Yeah.
Didn't exist. He was born in 1933. Israel didn't come around until 1948.
Yeah.
So it was special.
Yes.
And
Was he proud of you when you became a rabbi?
when I told my dad, I said, I really think I want to go to rabbinical school. Why would you do that? You're going to have 1,000 bosses. They're not going to appreciate you.
Yeah.
That's the only kind of rabbi my father knew. He only knew the old
Yeah.
Orthodox rabbi who showed up with a little herring spot on his tie,
Yeah.
asking for money.
Yes.
But so I go. I do it anyway. My parents, when I came to Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles, they had a condo in Palm Springs. They would drive in Saturday mornings if I was preaching and sit out there. And it didn't matter if there were 200 or 2,000 people out there, Paige. All I saw was a set of teeth
Yeah.
behind my father's broad, broad smile.
Oh, I love that.
And that, he got there because it's also partly because he could never have envisioned
Yes.
the kind of rabbinate I constructed,
Yes.
the kind of congregation I helped to grow.
I
So,
think that's so much of parent-child relationship. You don't even have that big of an age difference because your parents were so young when they had you, but,
no, I was the
I'm
fourth.
30. Oh,
I
and you
was
were the
the fourth,
4th, right. But
but
it's like you can't envision what your child is consciousness because each
here's where Job
generation.
was right. We only know what we know,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And
I'm really curious when you got into the work at Wilshire
yeah,
Boulevard Temple, did you expect it to be as much about holding space for loss? To me, your voice, you have become one of the voices
yeah,
in our collective consciousness in America, at least, of really becoming a leader in loss and how to be compassionate in that experience. So did you know though, as a rabbi, that you would gain that kind of perspective?
no. And I wasn't well
Yeah.
prepared for it. The seminary is a disaster, by the way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's all of your professors are people who couldn't get jobs in the congregational rabbinate because they're too socially awkward. So
Yes.
they know. They know nothing about running a big synagogue. So um, no is the answer. I was ill prepared, but I, as I said earlier, have always been a person who has run toward other people in trouble.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
my psychiatrist tells me that's because I wasn't rescued as a child. I wasn't, whatever, paid attention to, whatever.
Yeah.
Therefore, I see that in others and I want to help them. It's
Yeah.
probably true, but who knows?
Yeah.
So I did work hard at becoming a good writer. I
Yes.
part of the craft and at the hybridization of the craft by becoming a really good speaker.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I taught homiletics for 13 years at the seminary. Homiletics is just a fancy word for writing sermons, wedding addresses, and eulogies.
Okay.
one of the most difficult things for me to improve in those students, because they were all excellent students coming from excellent colleges and universities, but they only knew how to write to be read.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to write to be heard. It's
Yeah.
a completely different vernacular,
Yeah.
different language.
Yeah.
I was always good at writing to be heard.
Mhm.
I don't know why, but that was my genre.
Yes.
And
And do you feel like over the course of what you would call the couch of tears, is that where you were humbled and really earned the right to take a stand on what, because what I'm getting at is I do feel like you have a perspective about the universality of being human, what it means to be human.
where
Do
does
you
that
learn
come
that
from?
in your office? Yeah, that one-to-one when someone comes and confides in you?
Yes, and I am a conduit through which ancient wisdom can flow to modern problems.
Yeah.
There is no aspect of the human condition that the sages did not think through very deeply.
Yeah.
And the human condition hasn't changed, Paige.
That's
We,
right. Yeah.
we think we have modern problems. We don't have modern problems. You think we're the first people to live through a plague
Right.
or disease or a firestorm or
Yeah.
mugging or violence or a dead child?
Yeah.
2,000 years ago, 50% of children never saw their fifth birthday. They died.
Yeah.
2,000 years ago, you were a child till you were 12 or 13. Then you got married, you had your own family, and in your mid 30s, you were toothless and dead,
Yeah.
if you were lucky. So the sages, they knew a lot about loss. They knew a lot about what it took to live with other people in a small community. And it's not that they knew more information than we know. You and I have more information than a king had 200 years ago.
Right. Right.
We know more facts,
Yes.
but what they had that we don't have is they had time to think about what they knew.
Yes.
And they had time to search for the truths beneath the facts.
Yes.
And when people have a hard time reading the Bible and feeling it's legit in any way, they say, "Oh, come on. That didn't happen." So you're right, it didn't. But that's not the point. It's not a book of facts. It's a book of truths.
Yeah.
Do you think the seas split? Hell no. But is it true that in order to liberate yourself from slavery of any kind, you have to walk through a very frightening, narrow place to get to the other side? That's
Yeah.
true. Ask any addict. It's true. Did
Yeah.
Noah get all those animals on a boat? Hell no. That's not what this is about. Are the creatures on this planet and the destiny of humanity in our hands? Yes.
Yeah.
The ancients had this kind of perspective. You know, when people say it's a myth, they misuse the word. Oh, that's a myth, like that's a lie. A myth is not a lie. A myth is a way of describing a truth
Yes.
and an internal truth. So my credibility, I guess, or my education comes from being steeped in that ancient wisdom, which is absolutely spot on today
Yes.
in many cases, not all. I mean, the Bible also says you should take homosexuals to the and stone them to death. So I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not telling you that all of it is just this
Right.
incredible mythology, but much of it is, particularly
Yeah.
the narrative part. Number one, yes. So my authority, insight, whatever comes from that. And yes, you are right. It comes from having a front row seat to life for 4 decades
Yes.
and really seeing the human experience up close,
Yeah.
really up close, and seeing people in their most intimate moments.
Yeah.
And I do have that shard of ice
Yes.
that enables me to take notes,
Yeah.
enables me to think, step back and say, wow,
Yeah.
there's a truth here being unveiled right in front of me.
Well, what I was thinking earlier when you were telling us that story about how you changed in your grief work and in how you counsel and support after your dad's death, isn't that just life that it was that way? That you had your dad until you were 57 That's a long time to have your dad, especially with that level of stress that he was living through,
Well,
and
yes, but at 4
all that, but both it's you had the shard of ice and you had
bingo.
it's like what we were talking
I
about,
had
so
the real experience
yes,
and the experience of voyeurism and empathy
yes,
for so many others. And for whatever reason, Paige, in some ways I'm a very judgmental person, but they're
yeah,
mostly private ways.
yeah. That's good,
I
yeah,
keep it to myself.
yes,
I try to present, and I think successfully do present, an accessible and non-judgmental welcome.
yeah,
And before I open my mouth, when someone comes to me with a moral failure or a dilemma or a weakness, whatever, something they're ashamed of, something they did or something they failed to do, before I open my mouth, I really do this. I stop and I ask myself, where is that flaw in me?
yeah,
I may not have done the identical thing, but when have I betrayed? When have I been betrayed?
mhm,
And then, and only then, do I engage. Because then I'm engaging from a place of empathy,
yeah,
not moral superiority.
yes,
I don't know how else to be, but I also believe it's part of the reason that so many people have come to sit on what I call my couch of tears in
yeah.
my office, and I'm a helper.
I wanna ask you about this aspect of grief since you have been on the front lines and seen so many aspects. It's like a prism, right? The light hits it in all these different ways.
Mm,
And we are having this conversation 4 weeks after wildfires have ravished the Pacific Palisades and Altadena, 2 of our beautiful areas, and we both live in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area. And I have had a lot of conversations about people's response to this. People have been affected to varying degrees. And the particular aspect of this that I'm interested in that applies to all sorts of situations
mhm,
is when you go through something and you survive it to a different degree than maybe your neighbor survives it.
mm,
And your situation is slightly different, but you're still feeling suffering, you're still feeling loss.
mhm,
And you and I were talking before we started recording about the specifics of memory loss and how that, in our aging parents, because this community listening has aging parents. And that's another conversation that comes up, taking care of aging and particularly memory loss. It's a big deal, in this community. It's a big deal in our culture, and how many people it's impacting. So, will you talk to us about, let's call it meeting the moment
mm.
of when guilt and loss kind of intersect and
Yes.
what
You
that
mean
is about?
survivor's guilt, essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah,
tell us
yeah.
about that and how it interacts
Well,
with.
I mean, to cut to the quick, if you win the lottery, you say thank you and you go on with your life,
Yeah,
as you should. So that's number one.
yeah,
And sometimes when I say that to people, you can just see their shoulders drop and the pressure. They're like, why do I feel guilty about winning the lottery?
yeah,
I'm the lucky one. I'm going to move on with my enjoy my life. Okay. I have almost been killed in car crashes twice.
yeah,
I wasn't. I still drive. Like I won the fucking lottery.
yeah.
Let's go. Let's get some ice cream. You know? So that's a blunt tool. But
Yeah,
fundamentally, that's a part of it. Now, the other thing is, I think, and I'm going to use what most people perceive as a harsh word, but I think it's the accurate word, and I think it's the only word. And I see this so much with people recovering from all sorts of losses and losses incurred by people they love.
yeah,
Okay. My dad had Alzheimer's for 10 years. My father died twice. He died the first time when his mind was no longer my father's mind.
yeah.
And then he died the second time when his body died. And they are both really painful.
Mhm.
Anyone who thinks, well, I wish he would die at this point, and I mean, I've suffered so much through all of this, and yeah, it'll be a blessing when he does. Well, yes and no.
Right.
It really hurts too.
Different. Yeah,
It
different.
really hurts. So there's a word, the word is betrayal.
Mhm.
We tend to think of betrayal as the kind of thing that the lowest form of human engages in. Pond scum will betray you, right?
Yeah.
There's another aspect to this harsh word betrayal that I think is empowering for people, particularly people who are caregivers for people who are suffering of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any chronic disease. It's a very helpful thing for people who lose a loved one, who not even lose. I don't like using that word because they die. People who have a loved one
Yeah.
die. Okay, they're not
Yeah.
lost, they're dead.
Yeah.
By the way, I think using the proper vocabulary with children is enormously important.
Yes.
Grandpa's not sleeping.
Yes. I
Grand-
totally agree.
Grandpa's heart stopped and he died. His body died.
Yes. Well, part of the whole problem with why we need so much grief support is because we don't know how to talk about it from
We
this
don't.
from
And
the
we
jump. We don't say,
don't.
"Guess what? Everybody's gonna die," and that's part of the deal.
And we homogenize it,
Yes.
right?
Agreed.
The minute the person dies, you call and the mortuary comes and takes the body away.
Right.
It's not how it used to be.
Right.
Any more than we used to buy our beef in cellophane styrofoam packages at grocery stores.
Right.
We didn't used to do
Right.
that. You raised it, you slaughtered it, you ate it.
Yeah.
Very
It's
different.
it's
Very,
also I wanna throw this in too, Steve, it's like sacred text. We used to actually be contemplative. You read it, you visit it, you had some sort of ritual with it.
and again and again and again.
Yes. So it's what you were saying earlier. It's always been this way, but we've lost the pace, the
That's
moving through it.
that's
But
right.
I wanna understand
Let's get to the
betrayal more.
betrayal part.
Yeah, I wanna understand that.
So I'll give you an example. I'm making this up, but because I want it to be generic, so I'm not calling anyone up, but it's very common. Steve, you know, Myra's been dead for more than a year now. I know you remember. Thank you for everything you did. And my kids, they want me to start dating, and I don't want to start dating because it feels so wrong, disrespectful, untrue to what we had. And I will then say, does it feel like you're betraying her?
Yeah.
And he will say, yes, it does. I said, well, betrayal is a necessary component of reemerging and embracing life.
Mm. I'm writing that down. That's so beautiful.
It really is. And we, our very DNA, every molecule in our body, unless we're suffering from a pretty severe mental illness, every molecule in our body is striving toward life, toward light, toward meaning, toward
Yeah.
love, toward connection. And it reemerges after terrible loss, as it should. Now, I'm not telling you that grief and mourning is a race. It's not.
Mhm.
But there does come a point where if you're ever going to really live again, there is some measure of betrayal required.
Yeah.
And once you say that to people, for in many cases they pause. They think that is what it feels like. But the rabbi is telling me that that is a feeling worth honoring,
Yeah.
exploring, and dipping my toes into the water of that kind of betrayal that
Yeah.
comes with embracing life.
And
And
allowing it to be there, like we talked about earlier. It's there. It's both and.
it's a part of it. You don't get to be, you got to suffer through a lot of things to get to the next thing. And that's the truth of life.
Yeah.
And death, I don't know why, but this is popping into my head. It has to do with this urge for life. You know why people don't like plastic flowers?
Why?
Because they have no death. And because they have no death, they have no life.
Mm. Yeah.
Wallace Stevens, the poet, said, the beauty of a flower is that it fades. Now, if we can get to that place, would I say this to the parents of a 2-year-old? No.
Right.
Would I say
Right.
it would I say it to myself if, God forbid, something happened to Betsy? Eventually, I would. I would say, I'm still alive. I need to find out a way to live with loss.
Yeah.
And yes, it's an amputation, and we all know about the phantom limb. I call death the absence that is always present.
Yes.
And I wish I'd thought of that. I didn't, but I think it's perfect.
Yes.
It's the absence that is forever present. Okay, now what?
Right. Right.
Now what?
Yeah.
Okay, the fire happened. And I don't know about you, Paige, but I've given up all hope of a better past.
Yeah.
Now, that's also a very powerful idea for people
Yes.
when they come to you with regret or real loss, real pain. And I don't mean to be dismissive of that pain, but you and I, we have a job. The first job is triage.
Yeah.
The first job is let's just get this person headed in a 180-degree direction the other way.
Yes. Of course. Yeah.
And one can accomplish that pretty quickly by saying, I don't know about you, but I've given up all hope of a better past.
Yeah.
It immediately starts you thinking about the future,
Yeah.
or at least the present.
And I think that's so powerful, especially with the fires, because I've had conversations where the people, first of all, people weren't home. So that if you weren't home, you weren't home. But some people weren't home in like ways that they don't think was that important. Like, why did I go to the grocery store right then? Or why did I take the dog to the vet right then? And then the people who were home, it's like, why didn't I grab that other album? Because and my husband and I had to evacuate with our kids, but only we weren't that worried, but we just did it, for
We did
24
too.
hours.
We did too.
And so you think having that experience just a few weeks ago, my husband, we took 2 different cars because he wanted to stay and get more stuff. Now, if our house would have burned down, I would have been glad that he did that, but I just wanted to get the kids and the dogs, and I got the few things that I wanted, and I would have been fine, but I think I would have regretted, it's like I can relate
Here's,
to my clients who are talking.
I'll tell you, I'm interested in whether this is true for you and your clients. The last book I wrote was called For You When I Am Gone.
Yes, I
And
love that book.
it's 12 questions to tell your life story, essentially. And they're based on the questions I ask in an intake meeting with a family to get my arms around the truth of this person's life who I'm about to eulogize.
Yeah,
The first question in the book is, what do you regret? And what I have found over the years and through the ways in which essayists answered these questions in the book, along with my answers, what most people regret most at the end of their life is not something they did, it's something they didn't do.
yeah,
There are two types of, to put it in religious terms, there are two types of sins. There's the sin of commission, the things we do, and then there are the sins of omission,
yeah,
the call we didn't make, the time we didn't show up, you know, the outstretched hand we didn't put a dollar bill
yes,
to. Those are the things that haunt us.
yeah. I relate to that because it's the courage I didn't have that I'm like, "Oh, why didn't I have more courage?" Whereas when I make the mistake, one of the ways that I think about it is I did the best I could with the knowledge I have,
But
yeah,
I
at the
think that
time.
our mistakes of commission are much easier to normalize and live with
Yeah.
than our mistakes of omission.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, because you can apologize, you can make up,
Right,
you can
right.
rationalize,
Yeah.
you can undo some of the damage of a sin of commission,
Yes, I totally get that.
but you cannot,
You can't get it back. Yes.
just can't.
Yeah.
And that is what I've found on many a deathbed is I had a wish I had, and I still say to people, even when they're dying, I don't know about you, but I'm not planning on having a better past.
Yeah.
And it is a relief.
It's a relief.
It's stating the obvious in a way it's generally not stated.
Yes.
But the moment you realize, well, there's nothing I can do. The house
Yes.
is gone.
Yes. You know why it's a relief? It's because it's a reality. And I think sometimes just confronting reality with an embodied presence to it is what is the most healing. It just can be terrifying.
Isn't a diagnosis better than not knowing?
Right. Right.
Because then you look, you know what I really do? I organize chaos for people.
Yes.
That's the job.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
feel like the bottom has fallen out of the world. And I show up. and maybe I start with a joke. I'm just myself. This
Yeah.
also is extremely important. When you want to help other people, they don't need you to pretend. They need you to be real.
Yes.
Because if you
Yes.
pretend, it adds to this feeling that everything is now different and it's never going to be okay.
Right. And it
So,
isolates the person. They're like, "Well,
even
I just
more,
wanna connect and make a joke." You
yeah,
like getting the giggles at the funeral, it's the best
so
giggles.
important.
Yes.
Now, not only is it important because you're being real, like if you're a joker, joke. If you're a crier, cry. If you're a
Yeah.
feeder, feed. If you, people say, "What should I do to help my friends? Their house burned down." I said, "Be you. Show up and
Yeah.
be you."
Yeah.
If you're a joker, joke. If you're a feeder, feed. If you're an errand runner, run errands. If you're a dog walker, walk the dog. If you're a crier, cry. If you're a hugger, hug. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Show up and be real. Everyone knows how to do that. Paige, after 40 years of standing on a front doorstep before I go into the home where someone, a loved one has died, after 40 years of standing in the hospital hallway before I walk into that hospital room, after 40 years, I don't know what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
All I know is I have to walk through the door, show up, and be real.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's everything. And again, it changes nothing,
Yes.
but it means everything.
So
And
true.
I have also found with humor particularly, I did a tiny little video on Instagram, I don't know, like right after the fires, and I
Yeah.
talked about the importance that I wasn't preaching that, hey, cheer up. It wasn't a hey, cheer up thing. It was a, I know from all these years of being with people whose lives have fallen apart,
Yeah.
the moment someone cracks a joke, like if at the funeral or after the funeral or when I'm doing the intake and someone says, yeah, well, when mom was out of town, we went to 7-Eleven for dinner and
Yeah.
everybody laughs. I know they may not. I know they have subconsciously made the decision to survive.
Yes.
To laugh is to choose life.
Yeah.
I look in the corner when I go back to a house after a funeral and everybody's gathering and I see the widow like really enjoying that piece of chocolate cake.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, she's going to make it. She
I
doesn't
love
know
that.
she's going to make it,
Yes.
but she's going to make it.
Yeah.
There were jokes in Auschwitz.
Yes. You have to. It's life. It's vitality that
Exactly.
you're still alive. You're still alive until the moment,
And it's
the
hope.
very end.
And it's hope.
And it's hope. Can you tell us what you believe is beautiful about human life? And can we end on what is beautiful about your life? Now you've retired or semi retired, whatever you would consider yourself. So I want both the rabbi version and the wisdom and the hours with human nature. And I'd love just
I,
this,
I,
you as a man.
so I'm not trying to oversimplify or deflect. I'm really not. But the
Yeah.
first answer that comes to my mind is everything.
Oh, oh, that makes my eyes water.
Everything. But you have to turn it and turn it and turn it and turn it and sometimes suffer and
Yeah.
sometimes be frustrated and confused. But in my view, this word spirituality, it gets thrown around a lot and it's been so overused that it has
I totally agree. I totally agree.
no meaning and no purpose
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And when you're a rabbi, if you're a dermatologist, people show you, they text you pictures of ugly stuff on their body, or you're at a cocktail party, they want you to look at a mole. If
Yeah.
you're a rabbi, people want to like play this game called Stump the Rabbi. So they'll ask you these deep existential questions like, Rabbi, what's the meaning of life? And you're sitting at a
Yeah.
dinner party. And so, Rabbi, people say to me, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I'm like, what does that mean? And I have come to the conclusion that what it means to be a spiritual person and to lead a spiritual life is to commit to the notion that there is no such thing as a small blessing. If
Mm.
it's a blessing, it is enormous. Not all faiths I know of have a prayer
Yeah.
for bread or before you eat. Why?
Yeah.
Why? Why a prayer over something as mundane as bread?
Yeah.
And the answer, of course, is if you can be grateful for bread, then you can be grateful for many, many things. So even what is ugly or painful
Yeah.
is exquisitely beautiful because it wakes us up. Marshall McLuhan, I love this. Marshall McLuhan, Canadian philosopher, he said, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't the fish.
It's so good.
Isn't it?
It's so wise.
I
I
mean,
love
that's
it.
really Job's point. That's God's point to Job, too.
Yeah.
Why doesn't the fish know about water? Because it's born in water, lives in water, dies in water.
Yeah.
Doesn't know it's in water.
Yeah.
And does the fish discover water? When it's yanked out of it on the end of a
Yeah.
hook and it's flailing around, gasping for air. That's when a fish discovers water. Now, when did I discover the deepest, most powerful truth about life and death? When I saw my father's dead body. And it
Yeah.
was fucking painful and sobering and powerful. And it
Yes.
has resulted in a more beautiful life for me. So when you ask me, like, what is beautiful? Everything.